Men haven't vanished. They've opted out. And the shocking part isn't that men have given up on marriage, it's that so many women still can't understand why. For decades, men were told marriage was the ultimate goal: find a wife, buy a house, have kids, provide. But younger men are looking at the results of that deal and quietly saying, no, thanks. Not because they hate love, not because they're immature, but because the cost of marriage today feels dangerously high and the benefits painfully low. They've watched their fathers, uncles, and friends walk into family court as husbands and walk out as visitors in their children's lives. They've seen men lose homes they paid for, retirement they built, and peace they earned, all while being told it's somehow their fault the marriage failed. When most divorces are initiated by women, when custody heavily favors mothers, men see a system where one signature can turn their entire life upside down. So they ask a simple question: what's in it for me? Sex? You can get that without a contract. Companionship? Friends and community can provide it. Children? Divorce can take them away. Love? That doesn't require a legal document. Meanwhile, the risks are brutal: lifetime financial obligations, false accusations that can ruin reputations, and a culture that often assumes the man is guilty no matter what the story is. And when men voice these fears, what do they hear? Who hurt you? You're just afraid of commitment. Real men step up. That response is the problem. Instead of listening, many people shame. Instead of asking, what would make marriage feel fair and safe for men, they say, man up and do it anyway. So men choose something radical: themselves, their peace, their future. Men haven't given up on love. They've given up on a framework that feels rigged against them. Until the courts, the culture, and the conversations change, the quiet exodus will continue. Men are not asking to be worshipped. They're asking for fairness, respect, and partnership, not punishment for saying, I matter too. Part 1. The Exodus begins. Why men are quietly walking away. Men haven't disappeared. They've disengaged, and the strangest part? Many women still seem genuinely confused about why. But this isn't a mystery. It's a message men have been sending for years while the world refused to listen. For generations, marriage was considered a cornerstone of adulthood, something every man was expected to do. But today's men are looking at the landscape with clear eyes and sharper awareness. They're not rejecting love. They're rejecting risk without reward. They're rejecting a system that asks everything of them and offers very little in return. The quiet truth is simple. Men have done the math, and the numbers are ugly. Look at what young men see around them. They see their fathers, uncles, co-workers, good men, responsible men, getting financially gutted in divorce court. They watch custody battles where being a devoted father means almost nothing. They hear stories of men paying alimony to partners who cheated or losing homes they spent years building. These aren't rare tragedies anymore. They're common enough that almost every man knows someone who's lived this nightmare. So younger men ask, why would I volunteer for a game where the house always wins? And I'm not the house. What's the upside? Love? You don't need paperwork for that. Sex? Available without legal contracts. Companionship? You can build community elsewhere. Children? A judge can limit your access or take them entirely. Now compare the downside: loss of assets, loss of stability, loss of mental health, loss of your identity as a father, and the crushing reality that society will still blame you anyway. Men feel like they're entering a battlefield where failure is assumed and success goes unnoticed. They're expected to be providers, protectors, emotional anchors, but the moment they express a need, they're told to man up. Their pain is minimized, their concerns are mocked, their trauma is dismissed with tired cliches like, who hurt you? Or, you're just afraid of commitment. This isn't fear, it's foresight. And when men start to share their stories, the loneliness of being invisible in dating apps, the sting of being used as a backup plan, the humiliation of being judged by height, income, or status, they're told they're bitter or misogynistic. But they're not angry anymore, they're indifferent, they're opting out not from hatred but from exhaustion. This is why the exodus keeps growing, not through rebellion but through self-preservation. Men are choosing peaceful solitude over chaotic entanglement. They're choosing financial security over potential ruin. They're choosing hobbies, friendships, goals, and personal freedom, things that give back rather than drain. The first phase of this movement wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet shift in mindset. Maybe I don't have to follow a script that was never written for my benefit. Men aren't giving up on love. They're giving up on a system that punishes them for trusting it. Part 2. The silent deal breaker. Why modern expectations push men away. If Part 1 explains why men started walking away, Part 2 explains why they're not turning back. Because even beyond laws, courts, and financial risk, there's another force pushing men out of marriage: modern relationship expectations that feel impossible to meet and easy to weaponize. Today's men aren't just dealing with legal dangers, they're dealing with emotional contradictions, cultural double standards, and relationship dynamics that feel doomed before they even begin. And the more they try to express this, the more they're dismissed, ridiculed, or blamed. Start with expectations. Men are told to be vulnerable, but not too vulnerable, strong, but never too strong, providers, but not controlling, supportive, but never with needs of their own. They must listen endlessly to their partner's struggles, but when they share their own, they're weak or needy. They must sacrifice, adjust, absorb, and apologize, often with nothing in return. Modern men feel like emotional ATMs, always withdrawing, never depositing. Then add the dating market. Men see profiles demanding six-figure incomes, 6-foot height, emotional intelligence, financial generosity, and unwavering attention from men who are expected to bring everything to the table while asking for almost nothing back. Meanwhile, many bring debt, trauma, entitlement, or prior relationships, but expect perfection from others. So men ask a hard question: why am I being evaluated like a product while being told not to treat others the same? It's not that men resent single mothers, career-focused women, or women with expectations. It's that men resent being told they must accept everything while being chosen for almost nothing beyond utility. They resent being treated like success objects, then shamed for pointing it out. And when men walk away from bad deals, the response is rarely introspection. It's blame. Men today just don't want to grow up. They're addicted to video games. They're afraid of real women. No, men are tired of being disrespected, dismissed, and devalued while being told to be grateful for the privilege. The emotional climate feels adversarial. Instead of teamwork, men feel tested. Instead of partnership, they feel examined. Instead of being appreciated for what they give, they feel judged for what they don't give enough of. And when conflict arises, many men find themselves on the defensive regardless of the truth. One accusation can erase years of character. Add it all up: emotional drain, double standards, being treated as Plan B, public shaming of masculinity, weaponized vulnerability, unrealistic expectations, and you get a generation of men quietly asking, why would I sign up for a lifetime of this? The answer for many is, I won't. This isn't anger, it's clarity. Men are realizing they don't have to participate in systems that exhaust them. They don't have to audition for affection. They don't have to prove their worth to people who only value them for what they can provide. Part 3. The breaking point: when men realize peace is more valuable than partnership. If Part 1 exposed the risks and Part 2 revealed the impossible expectations, Part 3 explains the moment everything snaps. The breaking point when men realize that peace is more valuable than partnership. Because at the core of this entire shift, there is one truth most people underestimate. Men value peace more than anything, and modern relationships often feel like the opposite of peace. For years, men were told that marriage would bring stability, purpose, and comfort. But what many men actually experienced was chronic stress, constant conflict, and emotional exhaustion. They entered relationships hoping for teamwork, but instead found themselves in competition, competing with expectations, competing with past traumas, competing with social narratives that paint them as villains by default. And when men finally step back and look at their lives from the outside, They ask a devastatingly simple question: why am I sacrificing my peace for someone who doesn't even like me half the time? This realization hits especially hard for men who tried. The ones who went to therapy, read the relationship books, planned the date nights, practiced all the right communication skills. Men who did everything they were told would save the relationship, only to discover the effort was a one-way street. For these men, the moment of clarity is brutal. It was never about trying harder. It was about being matched with someone who didn't want to meet halfway. And here's the twist. Once a man experiences true peace, even for a moment, he doesn't go back easily. Peace looks like waking up without criticism. Peace looks like pursuing hobbies without guilt. Peace looks like having money for the future instead of fights about spending. Peace looks like weekends filled with joy instead of emotional tension. Peace looks like being appreciated, not evaluated. This peace is intoxicating. Men aren't abandoning relationships, they're abandoning chaos disguised as love. And the more men choose peace, the more they realize something society never told them. Being alone is not the same as being lonely. Many men discover that solitude can be healing, productive, and fulfilling in ways their relationships never were. They find comfort in routine, joy in independence, and meaning in self-governed lives. Once a man realizes that his stress, anxiety, and depression were tied to the constant emotional demands and instability of a relationship, he understands something profound. His life improves dramatically when he is not being drained. This is the breaking point, the moment he no longer feels guilty for choosing himself. Some women interpret this withdrawal as immaturity or fear of commitment, but they miss the truth. Men aren't afraid of commitment. They're afraid of committing to someone who disrupts their inner peace. And here's the sobering part. Once trust in the system breaks, it rarely gets rebuilt. Men have watched too many examples, heard too many stories, and lived too many battles to simply try again. The peace they've found feels safer, cleaner, and far more sustainable. In part 3, the message becomes unmistakable. Men aren't walking away from love. They're walking toward peace. Part 4, the modern double bind, how men became the villains of their own relationships. If Part 3 revealed why men are choosing peace, Part 4 uncovers the deeper cultural shift pushing them even further away. The modern double bind that traps men no matter what they do. Today's men feel like they are walking into a relationship courtroom where the verdict is already written, and the only question left is how severe the sentence will be. Men are told to be leaders, but if they lead, they're controlling. They're told to be equals, but if they act equal, they're unromantic or unmasculine. They're told to open up, but if they do, their vulnerability gets used against them later. They're told to prioritize their partner, but if they prioritize themselves, they're selfish. In other words, men are expected to meet standards that contradict each other, and every choice is the wrong one. Consider masculinity itself. Many men feel they are punished simply for existing as men. Be ambitious, you're self-centered. Be protective, you're patriarchal. Have preferences, you're misogynistic. Set boundaries, you're controlling. But tolerate everything, you're weak. There is no winning path, only a maze of criticism where every exit leads to blame. This cultural reconditioning affects dating, relationships, and marriage. Men feel evaluated, scrutinized, and lectured, not loved. Instead of being appreciated for what they bring, they're told what they're failing to provide. Instead of being respected, they're given a checklist of improvements. Instead of partnership, they experience prosecution. And the irony? Many of the same voices criticizing men for disengaging are the ones pushing them out the door. A shocking number of men describe relationships that feel more like performance reviews than emotional bonds. They're expected to be emotionally fluent, financially successful, physically fit, socially capable, endlessly patient, and always available, yet able to accept criticism without giving any in return. Meanwhile, their own needs are deemed too much or unreasonable. Is it any surprise men stop trying? Then comes the public shaming. Men who speak openly about unfair treatment get labeled bitter, toxic, or misogynistic. Men who discuss the risks of marriage get mocked as insecure. Men who want a traditional dynamic get told they're outdated. Men who desire feminine women get told they can't handle strong ones. Men who pursue self-improvement get accused of doing it for validation. But when women express their preferences, applauded, empowered, encouraged, the double standard is glaring, and men notice. So they retreat, not out of anger, but out of clarity. They see the pattern: the more they give, the less they are valued. The more they try, the more they are judged. The more they sacrifice, the more they are taken for granted. And eventually they reach an undeniable truth. If being themselves is never enough, maybe the problem isn't them. Thus begins a cultural shift where men stop chasing relationships and start prioritizing mental health, stability, and their own boundaries, things they were never encouraged to protect before. Part 4 draws a clear conclusion. Men aren't becoming villains. They're escaping roles where they were cast as villains no matter how hard they tried. Part 5, the turning point: why men no longer believe anyone is listening. If Part 4 exposed the cultural double standards, Part 5 reveals the emotional fallout. Men no longer believe their voices matter, because every time they speak, they're dismissed or attacked. This is the turning point. This is where men shift from frustration to silence, and from silence to opting out entirely. For years, men have tried to communicate their concerns: the unfair courts, the one-sided expectations, the emotional labor imbalance, the fear of false accusations, the pressure to provide without appreciation, the constant blame placed on their shoulders. But instead of empathy, they get mockery. Instead of dialogue, they get shaming. Instead of curiosity, they get accusations. The phrase "men's issues" has become a punchline, not a conversation starter. A man shares his divorce trauma. He must have done something wrong. A man expresses fear of losing his kids. He's exaggerating. A man talks about emotional neglect. He's too sensitive. Try expressing concern about marriage, and the response is predictable. You're bitter. You're insecure. You're afraid of strong women. You just can't handle commitment. Not one of those responses actually listens. Not one acknowledges the legitimate patterns men see around them. Not one invites understanding. It's always men's fault, and men are tired. This constant invalidation creates a psychological wall. Why would men continue speaking if every word they say is twisted into weakness or wrongdoing? Why would they stay in systems where their experiences are minimized and their pain is discarded? Men begin to internalize a harsh truth: no one is coming to save them, no one is defending them, and no one is listening, so they withdraw, not angrily, strategically. Men stop explaining their boundaries and simply enforce them. They stop arguing their value and quietly build lives where their worth isn't debated. They stop chasing validation and choose environments where they're respected instead of corrected. They stop hoping women will understand one day, because every year, the gap between men's reality and society's narrative only grows wider. This is how you get an entire generation of men who prefer solitude over struggle. Not because they hate women, but because they love peace. Not because they're weak, but because they're tired of being unheard. Not because they've given up on relationships, but because they've given up on begging to be understood. And here's the heartbreaking part. Many women still don't realize this shift has nothing to do with them personally, and everything to do with a culture that refuses to treat men as human beings with emotional needs. When men say, "I'm done," they're not threatening. They're grieving. They're grieving the loss of an institution that once promised partnership but now feels like a trap. They're grieving the inability to express fear without humiliation. They're grieving the realization that society takes their suffering as a joke. By Part 5, the message becomes undeniable. Men aren't walking away because they want to. They're walking away because the world gave them no safe way to stay. Part 6, the rise of male independence, when self-preservation becomes a lifestyle. If Part 5 showed how men stopped believing anyone was listening, Part 6 explains what happens next. Men begin building lives that don't require marriage, approval, or permission. And once they discover how fulfilling those lives can be, there's no going back. This is the era of male independence, not anger, not rebellion, but deliberate self-preservation. Men have realized that if the system won't protect them, they must protect themselves. If the culture won't value them, they must value themselves. If relationships demand endless giving with little receiving, then men will give to the one person who always appreciates it, themselves. Men start investing in things that give back: careers, fitness, hobbies, friendships, experiences, stability. And they notice something powerful. Their mental health improves, their stress decreases, their confidence grows. Without constant criticism or emotional chaos, they become the best versions of themselves. Many men describe single life as the first time they could finally breathe. This is not the freedom of irresponsibility. This is the freedom of clarity. Men are choosing their peace with the same seriousness they were once expected to choose a spouse. They travel when they want. They socialize on their own terms. They build wealth without fearing it will be divided by a court. They sleep better, they eat better, they laugh more. Their time is theirs, their energy is theirs, their future is theirs, and that autonomy becomes addictive. Because for the first time, men realize they don't need anyone to complete them. They're not running from partnership, they're running from exploitation. They're not rejecting intimacy, they're rejecting one-sided emotional labor. They're not avoiding responsibility, they're avoiding systems where responsibility is demanded, but authority is denied. Meanwhile, society keeps urging them to man up and jump back into the fire. But those messages ring hollow now. Shaming men no longer works because men have built lives where shame has no leverage. You can't threaten a man with loneliness when he's more peaceful alone than he ever was in a relationship. You can't guilt a man into marriage when the legal risks terrify him more than being single. You can't manipulate a man with sex when he values his freedom more than physical access. This shift terrifies people. Why? Because for the first time in modern history, men are no longer trapped. They're choosing independence and thriving in it. Women are asking, where are all the good men? The answer is simple. They're working, lifting, learning, traveling, relaxing, creating, healing, living lives that don't depend on being chosen. These men didn't disappear. They evolved. Modern male independence is not a phase. It's a response to decades of imbalance. And unless the system changes, unless relationships become truly reciprocal, unless male concerns are taken seriously, this independence won't fade. It will grow. By part 6, the truth is unmistakable. Men are not avoiding marriage out of fear. They're avoiding it because independence finally gave them something marriage never did: peace, purpose, and power over their own lives. Part 7. The shifting power. Dynamic: why men no longer play a game they can't win. By the time we reach part 7, one theme becomes unavoidable. The power dynamics in modern relationships have shifted so dramatically that many men no longer see marriage as a winnable game. Not because women are the enemy, not because men hate commitment, but because the rules keep changing. And somehow, the blame never does. For decades, men were conditioned to believe they held the power in relationships. They were the providers, the decision-makers, the protectors. But modern society flipped that script without offering men a stable replacement. Today, men are told they're privileged and oppressive, while simultaneously expected to sacrifice, serve, and support without hesitation. They're told they have all the power, yet in the areas that matter most, family courts, custody decisions, domestic conflict, public perception, they often feel powerless. This contradiction leaves men stranded between expectation and reality. On one hand, they're still expected to lead financially, emotionally, and practically. On the other, they're told leadership is patriarchal, confidence is toxic, and boundaries are controlling. Men quickly realize something is off. They're responsible for everything but respected for nothing. It isn't that women have too much power. It's that men feel they have none and are shamed for noticing it. In dating, men face pressure to constantly prove themselves, prove their worth, their stability, their usefulness. But any hint of asking for the same in return is labeled controlling or judgmental. In relationships, Men feel pressure to take accountability, apologize first, de-escalate conflict, regulate emotions, provide financially, and maintain composure, all while their own emotional needs go unmet or unnoticed. Then, if the relationship breaks down, the narrative defaults to one conclusion: he failed her. It's a dynamic where men feel they can't win. If they speak up, they're wrong. If they stay silent, they're indifferent. If they give too much, they're smothering. If they give too little, they're neglectful. Every option leads to criticism, and every outcome is somehow their fault. So men make a radical choice. They stop playing, not out of immaturity, out of exhaustion, not to avoid responsibility, but to avoid environments where responsibility comes with no influence. Not because they don't value women, but because they value their sanity more. And the most startling part? Once men opt out, they realize life becomes noticeably easier. There's no emotional minefield to navigate, no constant self-monitoring, no fear of misinterpretation, no pressure to live up to contradictory expectations. Men who step away often describe it as stepping out of a storm and into sunlight. Independence gives them something relationships rarely did: a sense of control over their own lives. They choose how to spend their time. They choose who they allow into their peace. They choose how much they give and to whom. They choose stability instead of chaos. This creates a cultural ripple effect. More men leave the dating market. More men reject marriage. More men choose self-directed lives. And the more this happens, the more the power dynamic shifts again. Not because men seize power, but because they refuse to participate in systems where they feel powerless. Part 7 ends with a sobering realization: men aren't abandoning relationships because women gained power. They're abandoning relationships because they lost all power, and finally realized they don't have to play along. Conclusion. The message men are sending is loud, clear, and irreversible. After 7 parts of hard truths, painful patterns, and uncomfortable reality, the conclusion becomes undeniable. Men aren't running from marriage. They're walking toward freedom. Not because they despise love, not because they reject partnership, but because the modern relationship model demands everything from them while giving nothing certain in return. Men have watched the system. They've studied the stories. They've lived the consequences. And for the first time in generations, they're refusing to sign up for a deal that feels rigged from the start. Today's men aren't confused, lost, or immature. They're informed. They're observant. They're done sacrificing their mental health, their finances, their stability, and their futures for a framework that often treats them as disposable. Modern marriage hasn't simply lost its appeal, it has lost men's trust. And once trust breaks, the decline is irreversible until the structure itself changes. Men want connection, but not at the cost of their identity. They want partnership, but not at the cost of peace. They want love, but not at the cost of a system that punishes them for trying. Many women ask, where have all the good men gone? The answer is simple. They stopped volunteering to be casualties of a broken system. Until men feel protected, respected, and valued, the exodus will continue. Until their concerns are taken seriously instead of ridiculed, they will choose themselves. Until marriage stops being a legal and emotional gamble with stacked odds, men will prefer independence over instability. The bold truth is this: men didn't give up on marriage. Marriage gave up on men. And unless society is willing to confront that truth, the path men have chosen, self-preservation over self-destruction, will only grow stronger.